Happy Halloween and welcome to the Signal Watch. I'm your ghost, Ryan Steens. Once again, our cadre of co-contributors creep from the crypt for a spooktacular season of petrifying podcasts. We're reaching into our bag of tricks to line up some horrific treats in the phantasmagoric form of films that find a peculiar perspective on familiar frights. Stay terrified. We're going to try to make it work.
White on white, translucent black capes, back on the rack. Bella Lugos is dead. The back.
1, 2, 3, 4. John Dobson went a-fishing in the weir. He caught a fish up on his hook because it looked mighty queer. Now what the kind of fish it was, John Dobson couldn't tell. But he didn't like the look of it, so he threw it down a well.
Happy Halloween and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your spooktacular host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Spooky Simon Day. Hello. Happy Halloween, everybody. And this week we're doing Lair of the White Worm from 1988, directed by Ken Russell and starring a fresh-faced Hugh Grant, Amanda Donohoe, Catherine Oxenberg, who I don't know at all, but she was the American import, and Sammy Davis. Oh, well, and Peter Capaldi, one of my favorite Doctor Who's.
I was going to say, I can't believe you skipped right over Capaldi, but yeah.
He looks so different with he's got my old hair. They've all got my old floppy hair. But yeah, no, this was a blast from the past for me, because I remember, I guess, still being at school, maybe kind of like mid-teens, and maybe not even kind of pub age yet, or kind of like approaching it. And friends of mine watching this, and I don't think I watched it with them, but I remember everybody talking about it. Maybe it was on TV, but everybody talking about it the next day at school, and just kind of like almost mocking it and laughing at it. And we were just, kind of quoting it and stuff, and just kind of saying, "Oh, did you see that bit? And did you see that bit?" But then I must have seen it a couple of more times, pretty close, in close proximity, because I remember kind of like really enjoying it, and also kind of going, well, it's supposed to be funny,
Yeah.
People need to kind of watch this tongue in cheek a little bit. And then I literally don't think I've seen it for about 30 years, since about 1990. I don't know why. And actually, funnily, the last couple of years, I've been searching out the DVD or the Blu-ray, because I've been like, I really want to see that again. And I think last week it just kind of popped into my head that like we should do this, because there's just a lot going on, and it's a very original film.
There's a lot going on is the understatement of the year. Yeah. I saw this back in high school. I was at a friend's house, and he had an older brother, and the brother was watching it.
I bet he was with Desi Boy.
Right. That's what was going on, was basically like they'd heard there were boobs in this movie, so they'd rented it, and there were like the three brothers in the house and then various other boys running around, including myself.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, this movie is wackadoodle, like the whole time I was watching it. And then years later, reading Ken Russell's Lair of the White Worm, and I was like, oh, okay, that's what I saw. With no context. Well, Ken Russell, the director.
Yeah. So he wrote actually a novelization, did he? Or
no. Just that it was that I'd seen a movie by Ken Russell.
Oh,
it not known like who Ken Russell was at the time. I had not a clue.
And you're like, yeah, that fits.
yeah. Once I knew who he was and kind of attached all the pieces, yeah.
Got masturbating nuns somewhere. Somewhere in there. But Well, yeah, it was funny because I was watching it last night and thoroughly enjoying it. I thoroughly loved it. And it's probably my favorite out of the four that we've done so far. But but yeah, I'm kind of watching it, and then suddenly it kind of hits the hallucination scene, I guess, where she touches the cross, and the centurions raping nuns, and there's Jesus writhing, writhing around on the cross, and the snake attacking him. And then later on, it kind of does that again, but it goes into hyperdrive with Amanda Donohoe with a dildo covered in blood. And I'm just like, yeah, it's Ken Russell. It's like if you had any doubt, you don't anymore.
Yeah.
But it was, I really enjoyed watching it, and I was like, I'm like, how did anybody not get this at the time? How did anybody like kind of go like, this isn't a horror film or whatever, because it's so obviously. I mean, for God's sake, at the end of it, a guy pulls a hand grenade out of his sporran and throws it in the snake's mouth to blow it up. I mean, it's obviously like a comedy, a black comedy.
I mean, they're keeping mongooses in their pockets. I mean,
yeah.
when the cop is like dancing to the bagpipes and it goes on and goes on, like.
I mean, yeah, and just Amanda Donohoe is like a kind of Bond villain. She's having a great time. I mean, she's camping it up hugely. Lots of innuendos, about snakes and stuff. And yeah, it's just I thought it was fantastic. But apparently Ken Russell was a huge fan of Dracula, the novel. And he'd actually written an adaptation which never got made. But a friend of his said, well, read Bram Stoker's Lair, the White Worm. And he kind of read it, but said, he didn't think it was that good. But he kind of took the spine of it and adapted that. And he said, he kind of wanted to have something where you didn't have to go abroad for terror. It was actually kind of in your backyard in England. And he kind of merged it with the true legend of the Lambton worm. Which is a true thing. Well, it's a true legend. And he kind of said, but yeah, in reference to Dracula, he said, well, instead of bats, we had snakes. Instead of like a man, we had a woman. But he apparently said, it was supposed to be funny, and he actually kind of took Amanda Donohoe and Hugh Grant aside and showed them some Noel Coward drawing room comedy and said, I want you to play it exactly like that,
Yeah, I mean, the tone on it is very strange, which it doesn't shock me that Ken Russell has an offbeat sense of humor. You have from the, handful of Ken Russell movies I've seen. And I can see if you're not kind of dialed into it, just being completely baffled by this movie. I mean, it's
very English. Mm-hmm. And it's very weird. It's like it's not, it's super hard for, I would think, other countries to kind of get.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely some stuff in it that I'm absolutely not getting watching it. And I think that's okay. I think I'm getting enough of it to kind of get the basic gist of it. But I mean, it takes place during the day mostly. There's very few jump scares, or there's no jump scares. And
I guess Amanda Donohoe is kind of like the Renfield, really. She's kind of like the high priestess that feeds the snake or the worm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's an argument to be made that she's kind of a merge of Dracula and Renfield.
Yeah.
But she's great. I mean, full stop. I mean, she I don't know if she makes the movie, because the movie itself makes the movie, but
she plays it just right. And and around this time, she was like very hot property. I mean, she was kind of renowned for taking her clothes off very easily in pretty much every film. And she was also in a great film with Oliver Reed called Castaway. Which kind of came out, I think, a year before this, where she kind of like, it's based on a true story of a guy who kind of advertised for a wife to spend a year on a desert island with him, and he was like a kind of modern day Robinson Crusoe, really. And in that, it sounds like it could be terrible or like a dodgy old sex comedy. Her and Oliver Reed, but it actually works. Turns out to be like a really interesting exploration of the genders and just the fantasy of living on a tropical island compared to the reality of being able to do it.
Hmm.
So she'd for a young actress, she'd made a lot of brave choices, but she was definitely kind of like an it girl at the time. And it's kind of funny seeing Hugh Grant as well, because this is about 6 years before Four Weddings and a Funeral, which was his big breakthrough. And I think this period he describes as, I kept appearing in one after another Euro puddings, which are these financed by other countries, but none of them were kind of successful.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely remember going to see Four Weddings and a Funeral when it came stateside, and and then him suddenly overnight, becoming this huge star. There was this kind of weird thing of like, although they weren't really in the same movies, he and Emma Thompson kind of showing up around the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And he kind of came to America, didn't he? He had his big America film that was a success. 9 months or whatever.
oh God, she was in that. Even as I was saying, I think wasn't
Yeah,
she? Yeah,
wasn't she the doctor?
I think
Maybe.
she was. I mean, I saw it in like high school or something. It's really hard to remember, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but
But
yeah,
also,
it was. I mean, but yeah, it was weird to see him. I mean, he's good, and he seems to be having a really good time while he's making the movie.
yeah.
Um,
Well, he's kind of, I mean, it's not really stretching out of his comfort zone, but he's like, and it's also interesting watching it last night because I was like, he's kind of the hero and he's set up as the hero, and you expect him to kind of, behead Amanda Donohoe at the end or whatever. And then I guess he kind of does that to the mother, the mother of his girlfriend. But really, at the end, he's kind of busy, like, up in the hills, kind of like pumping gas into the tunnels. And it's Peter Capaldi who's doing all the heavy lifting, really.
yeah,
Um,
there wasn't really terrifically good payoff on the poison pumping. Like they did a lot of setup with that, and I was
yeah,
expecting a couple shots of the worm getting away from this poison or the poison billowing out of the tube or whatever, and none of that ever happened. And it was weird. They kind of suggest, yeah, it worked. That worked great. And I was
yeah.
like,
You
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 can't
see a
just
little
say
bit.
that.
Well, you see a little bit of it, don't you? I guess when the
Yeah.
worm comes up because
Yeah.
it starts kind of choking. But yeah, it's not really. I mean, it doesn't seem to like kill it or anything, really. It doesn't affect it that much. Um, I mean, if Peter Capaldi hadn't been there, I think it would have been a disaster.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's an interesting movie in that, like, as an American, you're kind of aware of these like historical tidbits, that about England. Like, of course, the Romans were there,
Yeah,
and kind of like the idea of like the Saint George fighting the dragon, and then the kind of the concept of the worm that you might have heard of, kind of
yeah,
in passing. Um, but to kind of see all of that kind of pulled together with a
yeah,
massive cave that I had no memory of being in the movie from high school, but going, oh my God, that's a real location, clearly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Um,
And it looks, it's very distinctive. Like they have the shot of it right at the start of the film. Um, that does look like a big hole, like that it's something made.
yeah.
But it's kind of like, I mean, it's a very interesting film, and like, I grew up literally with a Roman castle, a couple of miles from my house. So for me, it's kind of interesting. Like they weave all this together, like the fact that there was a pagan kind of like cult, and then a Roman fort was built on it, and nunnery was kind of built on that, and whatever, and it's all kind of affecting each other. These layers. Um, but I also like the fact that I thought it was kind of clever how rather than doing the normal exposition throughout the film, they had this kind of Irish band at the start basically sing the legend. So
Yeah.
it's like, there you go, you're up to speed, and now we'll start the film, kind of.
Yeah, I mean it's I mean if you can make out what they're even singing, it took me a minute to realize like, oh, this is relevant, like as the song was going along.
Funny
Um
accents. They got funny accents.
yeah, y'all talk funny. Um but the cast, in addition to Donahoe and Grant and Carapal, I almost said Garibaldi, Peter
Oh,
Capaldi.
Peter Capaldi, yeah.
Is so Oxenberg at the time was in a very popular American TV show called Dynasty, but I wouldn't have
Yeah.
seen it because in the 80s that was aimed at like my parents, not at me.
Yeah.
And so she is now most famous for her daughter was one of the people who had to get like pulled out of and deprogrammed from the Nexium cult.
Oh.
So that was what she's been up to for the past few years, was basically like taking down a cult in real life.
Oh wow. Well,
Um,
apparently she's the one I don't really recognize from anything else, but apparently she wouldn't go nude for Ken Russell. So he said he had to go to Marks and Spencer's and buy her some lingerie, like some kind of like normal everyday white pants and bra. And he goes, but she actually looked great in them, so I'm kind of glad that happened. But I
there's
imagine Amanda Donahoe, you didn't have to even ask her. She probably took everything off. Whereas this American actress was like, no, no, I'm not doing that. So
Yeah, she that American prudishness, yeah, she knew how that was going to play back in the States, I guess, when she
yeah,
saw what the rest of the movie was going to be. Um, but I'm unfamiliar with the sister Mary, the actress from
so
who
she's a British actress called Sammy Davis, like amusing name, obviously. Be like who's the other one who was famous for a while in the 90s? Minnie Driver.
Mhm.
That's not her name, but so yeah, Sammy Davis. So she was actually in Mona Lisa, I believe, with Bob Hoskins.
Oh, okay.
And she was in a bunch of stuff around this time. She was both her and Amanda Donahoe were both in The Rainbow, which was based on D.H. Lawrence's novel. After this, about a lesbian love affair. So again, lots of chance for nudity in that. Which I believe Ken Russell had been trying to make for years, and actually, so he had a 3-picture deal with Vestron, and Gothic had been a big rental hit before this. So that allowed him to make Lair the White Worm. And I think that made enough that they let him make The Rainbow because they knew that was kind of going to be uncommercial.
Mhm.
I will say Sammy Davis has always, I don't know what she's doing now, but she always drove me nuts back in the day because of the way she talked. Um,
Yeah.
because I always think she sounds a bit retarded, to be honest. And it's just, she kind of like does that accent in everything, and it kind of drives me a bit nuts. Yeah.
It's an acting choice for sure. She's just sounds very concerned all the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can see
It's a bit
that.
whiny. It's a bit
Mhm.
whiny. And it's a bit, I guess, like, don't want to say unintelligent, but unintelligent, I guess.
Yeah, she reminded me physically of Kate McKinnon, the SNL comedian.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I just kept looking at her going, God, if you told me that Kate McKinnon was her niece or something, I would not be shocked.
Yeah.
Um,
But
but
apparently,
yeah, she's not in the movie a ton. After I thought she was going to be the main character. Uh,
yeah, she's kind of like, they kind of pair them off. So, like, there's Hugh Grant and I guess Catherine Oxenberg, although they kind of get split up pretty early. And
mhm,
then there's Peter Capaldi and Sammy Davis, who, again, kind of get split up, really.
yeah.
Um,
And then
and then, yeah,
the poor Boy Scout who gets picked up.
you know what made me laugh watching it last night was Hugh Grant just drive straight past him
Yes.
in the rain. He's like, I'm not picking him up.
I actually laughed out loud at that. Yeah.
It kind of dooms him. But it's kind of cool how suddenly Amanda Donahoe's E-type Jag is just there without any sound, a bit like Dracula's carriage would be, you know. Um, and then of course it's come back to my house.
Well, he says, "What are you doing here?" And she says, "I'm snake watching." And it just like goes the amount of conversation of and
Snakes.
snakes, and then they're like 2/3 of the way through the movie, and like Peter Peter Capaldi's like, "Oh, is there something about snakes?" And I'm like, "Oh my god! How do people not know this wasn't supposed to be funny?" Like,
Yeah, yeah. Because he thinks it's like a dinosaur skull, doesn't he? Originally.
well, yeah,
Um,
there's just everyone's been talking about nothing but snakes for the previous like 50 minutes of the movie at this point.
snakes or worms. And
Yeah,
then Hugh Grant goes, "I have a theory."
yeah.
We're like, okay. So we already knew that, but. But yeah, it's like, I mean, it's definitely, very, very deep black comedy. I mean, originally, I think Ken Russell asked Tilda Swinton to be the Amanda Donohoe part.
Oh,
But
I didn't realize Tilda Swinton was a going concern at this point. Okay,
I mean, it must have been very early because the first thing I remember seeing her in was Orlando.
same. Yeah,
Yeah, which is almost 10 years after this. So she must have been pretty young. But yeah, I mean, apparently she turned that down. So, we got Amanda Donohoe, which is great. Um, but yeah, it's just, it just kind of barrels along really, without really kind of stopping to kind of and it's kind of funny, but it's also like, I mean, I wouldn't say anything in it's scary, but you do get a couple of good hand severs and a bit of gore. There's a couple of creepy moments as well. Um, I think, I mean, I guess in a way it is like a vampire allegory, really. Because these people do get kind of like infected.
yeah. It's definitely. I mean, I don't know how much of that was in the original novel. I have not a clue. But it's an interesting spin on, and that's where I felt better about this being. I mean, one, it's a Bram Stoker book, as you said. But
Yeah,
then two, like it does kind of stay on the same thread as the vampire thing, where people can get turned into these things. And it
yeah,
has this kind of great sting then at the end that feels like very 80s as far as like,
yeah.
how it wraps up there at the end.
It's like it's not over, or I mean, not that there's ever going to be a sequel, but
Never say never in this day and age, man.
get him some wigs, get him some floppy wigs. They can still pull it off. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I like I say, I really enjoyed watching it, and I mean, Ken Russell obviously knows what he's doing. He's a very creative, famous director, incredibly eccentric, and very individual style. I mean, he obviously did the movie of Tommy. He did The Devils, which we should watch that one time. That's an amazing film. He did back in the '60s. He got Oscar nominated for Women in Love. He did Altered States with William Hurt.
Yeah,
Um,
fantastic movie.
yeah, and I mean, pretty much even his bad films are interesting. He's a bit like Nicholas Roeg. Um, so watching this, I was like, yeah, you can definitely see his fingerprints on it. But then at the same time, it's really interesting seeing this period in British film history, and him kind of trying to make a commercial horror film in a way.
I think so. I mean, I think this is as close as he was ever really going to get, to something that people might at least get tricked into going to see at the theater.
Yeah. I mean, he
He
said it wasn't a horror. He said it's a what done it, not a who done it.
right, and I think that's totally fair. Yeah, I'd seen recently he did a Salome movie, just to
Mm,
see kind of what he could do on a super low budget in like one location, and he basically did it on a dare. It sounded like when I looked it up after I watched it, but he the visuals in this movie are really, really interesting. Like, and I'm not just talking about the two hallucinations and the dream sequence. In the dream
No.
sequence, we could spend the next half hour unpacking.
Yeah, we should talk
Um,
about that.
but it's just so well done, and you're just so like wrapped up in how kooky it is while it's unfolding. Um, it's just really, really successful and shows kind of what you can do if you just think of some kooky things to do and you have a good location, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely imagination over money, which, I mean, we've always said Hollywood should pay attention to, but they're never going to.
Yeah. And yeah, so like if it's been a while since you've seen Lair the White Worm, this is when Hugh Grant, who is, he's from this line of people who slayed the worm 1,000 years ago or whatever, falls asleep in front of the painting of this happening, and then there's this great shot of him entering the cave, and then for some reason getting on
which is very like him walking into the cave is very like several kids dramas I've seen from the same kind of time, the 80s, like Box of Delights, where characters get sucked into paintings and things. It must be like there must be a department who did that really well for a couple of years, because I've seen that in so many other things. People walking into paintings.
Yeah, I mean it's a great looking shot. I mean there's no matte lines, there's no, I mean, any of that.
It's a bit Nightmare on Elm Street, really, isn't it? It's a little bit,
Actually, now that you say it, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then this whole crazy scene with the various women in his life as the stewardesses on this luxury jet that he's on, with the other passengers as the missing parents.
Yeah. Well, they're tied up, aren't they? And
Yeah.
Amanda Donahoe's one stewardess, kind of forcing them to drink, I guess, poison. And then, there's also like his girlfriend who's like trying to stop her. And I guess it reflects his desires for kind of both of them.
Yeah.
Because they start wrestling, and then he's holding like this red pen, and it kind of slowly goes up. And it's like, yeah, we get it.
Yeah, there's no subtlety here at all. There's two stewardesses wrestling in front of him. Yeah, it's
suspenders. Amanda Donahoe does show off her suspenders a lot in this film, is she? She twangs them a lot.
I've gathered what Ken Russell finds attractive, or has a fetish for. I think, that and nuns.
Fishnets and black lingerie. He's quite keen on.
Oh man,
aren't we all? I'd like to add, but yeah, no, it's like like you said though, kind of said it perfectly. It's like they get a lot out of a small budget, because really some of the effects, especially the worm, are like kind of Doctor Who quality at the time. There's nothing that kind of costs more than a few $1,000s here, really, or at least looks like it. But they kind of get away with it because the whole thing is kind of almost seeped with this kind of like weird dreamy kind of feeling. So it's almost like, you can kind of get away with more because it all feels a bit surreal.
I agree. I mean, I didn't think of it till now, but probably the reason we only saw the worm's head was because that's all they could afford to do.
Yeah, because it's supposed to be like 200 meters long, isn't it, or something?
So. Yeah. So that now that I think on it, it's like, well, that's probably why we didn't see the gas working, was they just couldn't afford those shots.
I mean, contrast that to like Dune, the worms in Dune.
Yeah.
It's definitely on a whole different budget. I mean, it kind of felt like a TV. It could have been made for TV, without the gore and the nudity, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think put a bra on Amanda Donahoe, and you definitely could have just put this straight to TV. In a lot of ways, but it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bra.
Yeah,
Amanda Donahoe. She probably wouldn't let you. She'd probably run off.
Get away. Yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think the story itself is not bad. I think that, having kind of Hugh Grant is kind of this, it's not exactly Hello Jeeves, but he definitely has,
Yeah.
the kooky relationship with his butler, and
Yeah, I really like that. I really like that. I love when he's like, where's that Billy dancing record that my father used to have? And his butler's so dry. He's like, you want me to open the door but lock up the chain mace? you know, um, and it's kind of great. It's a shame he gets taken out actually so quickly. But yeah, just like some lovely little kind of conversations between characters. Very kind of very tongue in cheek. Very kind of like slight wink at the audience.
yeah. So
And
yeah, I
then
mean,
and a great escalation. Towards the end where Capaldi's obviously got this plan. His boy's mongoose and his boy's bagpipes, and
and his
it's kind of
antidote, yeah.
it's just it's kind of great.
But yeah, I don't know how scary this movie is. Like I said, I just think it's a really fun ride, and partially like when she picks up the Boy Scout and then they're playing snakes and ladders, and then and then of course she takes him down to the tub. I mean, everything that's kind of happening. Like there's no
Yeah.
surprise here or any of that. I mean,
And some American films kind of have a bit of that, like Fright Night, but it's very kind of British in the fact that he thinks he's going to get a blowjob, and then she obviously bites him. And then I love the bit where the doorbell goes, and she goes, "Well, actually, I'm doing you a favor by doing this," and just pushes him underwater with her foot while he's paralyzed.
Well, she has that great scene where she's giving the speech and she's got the skull above her and she's, looks amazing in her lingerie, and she's like, the beast will return, and da, da, da.
Yeah.
And then the doorbell rings and she's like, oh, damn it.
Yeah. Which kind of reminded me a little bit of The Devil Rides Out as well. The kind of feel of this. Kind of similar, I guess upper class heroes rushing between mansions, trying to stop diabolical foreigners.
I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But but again, the dialogue was great where she first meets Hugh Grant, and she's like, "Well, he's like, I'm surprised I've never seen you," and she's like, "Well, I normally hibernate in the Windsor and stuff."
Yeah, the only people who don't know what's going on in this are our heroes. Like the audience, very clued into what's happening.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's almost like a joke. The story of what happened to the sister's parents. They were coming back from the pub, and we only found this watch. It's like
and they very clearly want to make the dad look like a goof. Yeah, it's
and the police aren't remotely bothered. They're like. Well, there's that great conversation, which almost tips a bit too far, where he's like, "I need backup." He goes, "What do you mean you're having your tea?" It's like, "Well, get on your bicycle." What do you mean you can't find your pump? So it's like how useless the country police are. They only got one car.
Take a cab. Well, I put that guy in jail.
yeah. I just did him for drunk driving. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I like I say, I really enjoyed it, and I'm really surprised I haven't forced this on girlfriends or friends since 1990. I don't know, for some reason it's just kind of faded away. Maybe because it is a bit harder to find and a bit more eccentric. There's so many other films that are more accessible, I guess. But yeah. Very glad that we made the effort to see it.
Yeah, I think I think that's an interesting question, because I think in the States I remember it being on the shelf a lot of places on VHS, but as things went to DVD, I don't quite remember it being in video stores the same way, but I also wasn't looking for it. But
yeah,
it my suspicion is the Ken Russellness, and then of course I hate you hate to say nudity went a little out of fashion, but it did.
Yeah.
And with kind of that happening, and it was never in the States like something you heard people really talking about. It was kind of like a thing for film nerds.
Yeah.
It didn't play a lot on HBO or anything like that, I don't think.
Well, it's not
Um,
something like Hellraiser that can kind of travel. It's not it's almost a bit too clever and a bit too arty.
mhm.
And I
Well,
think
yeah, I think
and
that's
I think
absolutely right.
yeah, and I think like we were saying as well, just the tone. Like you and I tend to like really relish when
Yeah.
people mix genres or kind of play around with expectations. But I think a lot of people just don't like that because it makes it very hard for them to read what they're seeing.
Well, to your point, I mean, there was we're doing this on August 25th. A few weeks ago, there
Yeah.
was a Twitter thread of somebody who'd worked on Stargate or something talking about, and maybe we talked about this on another podcast, but saying like comedy and horror don't mix.
Mm.
And everyone's like, what are you talking about? And they're throwing but it was just the guy's taste. It was like, he's like, American Werewolf in London. He's like, don't like it. And it's like, well, that's you, guy. Like, you
Yeah.
can name a million things where you can. I mean, the comedy and horror are so close to each other.
Evil Dead 2.
Oh yeah, actually, I think
Yeah.
that's where Justin and I talked about it on the podcast during the Evil Dead 2 podcast. And
Yeah.
I mean, it to me, it's a absurd non-starter of a stance. Like I think comedy and horror really do go incredibly well together, and sometimes in ways that have made me incredibly uncomfortable.
Well, it's the
Funny
release, isn't
games,
it?
for example, like I found intolerable, but I totally got what they were doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Well, it's the release, isn't it? It's like, if you can scare somebody, but if you can actually kind of provide a laugh of relief afterwards and then scare them again, it's like that's going to be really powerful. Because you'll kind of catch them up by surprise. And I mean, American Werewolf is like the perfect example because that's the perfect blend where you've got like his best friend who's like in a terrible state as a zombie. He's terrifying, but he's talking like he would if he was still alive. Um, so yeah, it's like if it's done well. I think the problem is it's done badly a lot. Um, and that's why people don't like it because I've seen the kind of bad versions. But if it's done well, it's incredibly powerful.
I found this on Amazon streaming. It was really easy to get to now. And I do think, as far as like, was it super available before? I don't think it was, but I do think
No.
now it's super easy to find. It only cost a couple of bucks to rent. It wasn't like an expensive rental.
Yeah.
So, if it's been a while since you've seen it or you felt like you didn't quite grok it, when you watched it 15, 20 years ago, I would definitely say go back and watch it. This movie's, I mean, it's not like belly laughs every second, but it's the
No.
tone of it is so good. And kind of what they're up to. If you can't laugh when Amanda Donahoe pops out of a basket, and there's like an inflatable dinosaur next to the basket, like you and I have nothing to say to each other. Like that whole sequence was so good.
Yeah.
Um,
And there's lots of like nice little touches, like, like early on, I think she kind of nearly trips over a hose and the hose kind of whisks around like a snake. And just like little touches like that. Or like there's a bust of the Centurion's head who you end up finding out was her lover, hundreds and
mhm.
hundreds of years ago. So a lot of care has gone into it. Which you don't necessarily see the first time you watch it, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think that it was made by a very smart person who was maybe a little too smart for their own good, and
Yeah.
other people who were very into this scene were along for the ride, and it just makes for a really fun movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Hugh Grant himself said he didn't know whether it was supposed to be funny or not. but he said, but personally, I laughed a lot when I watched it. So, I think that kind of sums it up. If some of the cast didn't even know if it was supposed to be funny.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I would totally recommend it. Give it a go if you want something a bit different. If you don't want something different from like Halloween 5 or 6 or 7 or whatever you normally watch this time of year. This is definitely, you won't forget it, put it that way.
No, you won't. I mean, I barely watched it the first time I watched it, and I very much remembered Amanda Donahoe flipping over in the tanning bed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, for all of the reasons I remembered that. But
yeah. Yeah. Well, it's just like you say, there's so many interesting shots anyway from different perspectives or different angles. So just that alone is kind of interesting. But then you put in the performances and you put in the direction, and I think it works really well.
Yeah.
I kind of like and like I say, I've enjoyed all the films we've done so far this year. But I had a big cheesy grin on my face watching this last night, pretty much for the whole running time. I was just like, I'd forgotten how much fun this was.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think go off, watch this one. It's a good one, and I think don't put it on at a party. People are going to be confused by what's going on,
especially the religious.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness, yes. All right. Well, Simon, thank you so much for recommending this. I was very glad we got to do this.
Yeah, no, thank you, and happy Halloween, everybody, and we'll see you next time.
Happy Halloween.
On both sides of the way, lots of sheep and lots of sleep, and lived in mortal fear. So drink the health of Prince Sir John, who kept the babes from harm. Save cows and calves by making hearts of that famous dancing worm. So drink the health of Prince Sir John, who kept the babes from harm. Save cows and calves by making hearts of that famous dancing worm.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.